So how's your drive here?
Pretty good. How about yours?
I hate LA.
I think everybody does.
Well, I'm glad to get to this phase. You've probably seen on the postings the latest chopper paint over.
Yes, very good, by the way.
Oh, thanks. Well, I was really lucky to have Paul's good model to work off of too, because you probably saw these. These are the early renders that were done, just the rough modeling, and then we kind of got that dialogue going where we got everything polished up. But I think we're really happy with where it's at. One thing right off the bat when you look at this is, right now I called out all the glass as just kind of an olive green or just a kind of a Kelly green, just so that obviously what's glass, and we'll have to deal with that, as a separate sort of pass with regards to the interior reflectivity of the glass. It's going to be its own world, but I guess we should start digging into some of the surfaces. I'll just lead off by showing you this. These are just a composite of reference that I've done on existing helicopter surfacing, and it's everything from Blackhawks to commercial helicopters, but largely I'm pulling from a military reference with somewhat matte surfacing, basically near matte surfacing, somewhat like this helicopter. And I pull up some of these close ones, and I'm going to pass off these to you as well. I gave Paul some of this, but I'm going to give you these with regards less to the actual rivets and things of that nature, but more about the types of primers, paints, and some of the graphics that is common. Okay. And again, because this is hypothetical, it's pushed into the future. Take liberty, and we'll talk down the road about some of the graphics, some of the iconography that has that mechanical look. Things that say, caution, or it's going to have that final pass of arrows that indicate panels that detach, or that are mechanical.
Instructional decals and things like that.
Yeah, okay. And essentially, one of the things that's going to be interesting is any surfaces, as we pop open the interior, are going to have some of these primers. So we're a real big fan of that sort of sickly kind of chartreuse that the primers have on military equipment. We can maybe allude to that on a couple areas, but that's going to be a later pass. But on the exterior, the majority of it is going to have maybe some hot edges, where some of the edges near doorways
are a little worn and
weathered out, giving the sense that this chopper may have already 5 or 10 years of service on it. Mm-hmm. And then obviously it's got this strong thruster. This is a high-speed helicopter. Let's just assume this thing can clock some pretty high rates of speed, and it also has a hovering capacity. So some of the metallic surfacing and orbital sockets here are going to have a little bit of that patina or that burnout.
So these are basically metallic surfaces going on in that orbital area, or?
Well, some of the things that have the higher specular sheen are going to be they're going to have that iridescence that some metals get, like muffler exhaust on a car or a motorcycle.
Right.
Especially like if you look at some of the motorcycles where the exhaust pipes kind of get that strong rainbow quality, but still metallic.
Kind of pulling to it.
And we can do it really subtle, but I think it might create a nice deviation from this military drab that the rest of the panels and surfacing are going to be.
Okay. Now, as far as the paneling and detailing that you have, as far as the actual surface and everything, do you want it to be more high-tech and streamlined, or just to be like an industrial type of like military, application?
I would say some mix between just being a nice primered or coated surface, like some specialty metal, coating, but with a sense of the speed friction of
directionality to the actual dirt and surface.
Yeah. So it suggests that, especially because we're doing dark shots, and some of the opening sequences are going to be in this sort of overcast, snowy condition. Mm-hmm. So it actually might have an opportunity to showcase some of the jet the jet's like sort of trail exhaust impact on the surfacing. There's going to be the possibility of where the muzzles and the guns are, you're going to have like some flare off. So let's say as this thing is shooting and going at a high rate of speed, you might get some echoing dirt or filth that comes from anything that's related to munitions. You have these rockets down here. Let's say this thing is shot off a couple hundred rockets in the lifetime of this vehicle. You're going to see maybe some remnants of that.
Okay, that makes sense. And as far as the little lighting detail that you have here, anything particular you want to point out? Or
I showed it lit in this rendering, but likely this thing is going to go into stealth mode. And there's a few things that are not resolved yet, which is what would that surfacing be? Luckily, it's a tiny detail. I would say it would go opaque. And there's some things in this render that are not offering too much variance, so you might want to take some liberties. For instance, we have this, sort of turret right here. Mm-hmm. We could say that all the surfacing on the turret is maybe a slightly different color. Like it was manufactured by a different process, different company, and so that
maybe it was replaced at some point in time.
Right, exactly. I think that's a good way to go about this, is to give it that sense that it isn't just fresh off the shelf.
Right.
And it's kind of a new silhouette. I intentionally designed this to have a silhouette from a distance that is not exactly like any chopper we currently know.
Unique and iconic in its own way.
And what should make it interesting is that it's already worn, so you get a real sense that this is projecting 20 or so years forward, because it's not only a new chopper, but it already has wear. So you can kind of imagine, this chopper was manufactured 10 or 5 years prior to what we're seeing. Right. And already has some use to it. We might even at some point get down to, a couple dings in the surfacing. Okay. Which can either be done in the model or it can be indicated probably.
With the texturing, do some breakup maps or just scuffed up the surface paint to reveal the metal underlying underneath it as well. So.
And what would be interesting is, like, you see this part line I've got up here, let's say as an access panel. Mm-hmm. It might be interesting, like if you've ever looked down at a commercial airliner's wing section and you can see where the paint has been chipped or worn where they've removed the panel. It might be really clever to do that, especially on some of the sweeping shots where we're flying over the top.
Right. That'd be nice, breakup to have there as well. But, cool. And I wanted to ask one more thing. Concerning the turrets and everything. Now, are some of these details basically, painted over metal, or is it like gunmetal with a combination of some kind of, aluminum type of casing or something? Or what were you thinking about in this particular area?
Well, I'd say the reality of it would probably be like an aluminum or titaniums would be the mixture of metals. Some alloys would be put together, and it was probably like these powder coated or sprayed on special finishes. But it's going to be very parallel to the current military drabs that are either matte or have a small sheen to it, like an eggshell.
Right.
Where there's just a little bit of sheen. Part of that could be the fact that it used to be matte, and over the years, how like matte surfaces sometimes get slightly shinier.
Right, oily surfaces.
Yeah. Exactly. As they've maintained it, as it's flown, it's sort of built up a little bit of a wear that gives it more sheen off of hot spots. Okay. But essentially, it should still always look like it's drab.
Right.
And and I wanted to go a little bit off the military green, and not perfectly gray. Some mixture in between. Okay. And something that I played with on Geo's costume is that maybe the highlight, the specularity, let's say when it gets lit, goes a little bit warm.
Right.
So one thing we could try as a later pass is that the highlight edges have kind of an amber tone.
So it slightly blooms towards that.
It blooms just and it'd be subtle. We're talking subtle, and it's going to be in a blue snowy condition. So the idea is that this object is going to pop a little bit out of the snowy, so it'll just have a little bit of warmth in the highlight.
Okay.
And since we don't have sun striking this, it might not show up as much. But I want to see if we can push that and see if it shows up, just so that it separates slightly from some of its shots.
Well, yeah, and actually a lot of that can be done in the shader as well, so that they can play and dial in however much they need to tweak the shot to give that extra little kick of beauty or whatever. So.
Yeah, right. So. And one thing I haven't touched on too much, and we can play with this as you dig in and sort of get a feel for this, is how to separate out the blades. Certain things have not been called out as being separate, so we might want to, again, much like I was suggesting with the turret, the hover element of the jetpack here could have a slightly different metallic sheen to it, because that is an orbital socket, so that could have like a black anodized, black chrome kind of look to it.
Right.
So the highlight is going to feel metallic and chrome-like, but it's going to be super subdued.
Okay.
And that might be something to play with. So we'll have to see where that goes. And right now, because this is a 2D, paint over, it looks a certain way. We're going to have to see, of course, how it's going to play out in shots. And so some of this might distort, after we test it.
Right. Especially when it gets to the shader part of it. A lot of that stuff is going to be basically how the light hits it and creates that effect that you want as far as the look of the metal and everything. So, it's going to be a lot of back and forth, but I think it's pretty doable. So.
Yeah, good. Well, luckily, it's a pretty mad object, but
Right.
and go to town with rivets and details and graphics and throw some stuff in there. I haven't added much of the graphics that we were talking about earlier. The access panel,
Right.
arrows, anything like that.
Instructional stuff.
Instructional graphics, exactly. But I'm just thinking we should do something that's slightly different. So when we finally get to those graphics, we'll probably do. If you want to throw some on, and then what I'll do is we'll come in and tweak them or give them a slightly new look.
Right.
Like it could be from a different division,
Mm-hmm.
of the government, or it's like again special ops. They could have their own little look to everything,
Right.
and maybe we don't play with any graphics. Maybe there's no need. If there's specialists working on these helicopters, they know what panel to go to. They know what screws
Very
to
true.
unscrew.
Exactly.
There we are. I think we've touched on most everything. Is there any other thoughts you have about this? Or?
For now, no. I think it's pretty good. I'm just excited to get to work on it.
Yeah, I can't wait to see it.
All right.
This will be great.
Cool.
All right. Yeah, it was good seeing you.
Nice seeing you as well. Thanks a lot.
Sure.